All right, so this is the pickup lecture for this week, and as people know, I typically stream this live on TikTok, and I do it also on YouTube. But this week is going to be a bit different. So right now I'm recording it for YouTube, and then I'm streaming pretty much live. So this week's lecture was strategies for dismantling racism and bias, and this is week 7 for the Roots of Racism course. So Roots of Racism is a course that started roughly about 8 weeks ago with the whole Hillman talk thing. And since then, it's been a learning challenge, and it's been a learning experience as well. And so one of the things that I've learned is that this is a lot of work, especially for anybody that's been doing any of the teaching. It's a lot of work on top of, your day-to-day job, your family, and everything else. And I've been hit with a couple of things, deaths in the family, and also with the coming of Ramadan as well. So this has been quite the challenge on getting this class and this lecture and everything going. But we've made it to week 7. Tomorrow starts week 8, which is the capstone for this particular class. And the capstone isn't going to be a lecture. So technically, this is the last lecture for this particular course before this course ends. So next week will be the capstone. I'll be putting up a intro video for people to stitch based off of what they learned from this week. And so with that being said, I'm probably just going to go ahead and get into the lecture. Lecture is roughly around 30, 45. Most of this is impromptu only because I just haven't had the chance to really get started with writing down anything and just kind of putting everything together, just because it's been a lot of work. And I can see how some of the people have been getting burnt out from doing this, because for college level work, it takes work. And I don't think people really understood that before taking the class. So even though I have almost 800 people in my class, I've seen the engagement go down from 200 people down to 100 people, down to 50 people, down to 20 people. Hey, Anna, thank you. So I've been watching the engagement go down with the Hillman talk thing, and I think people have been getting burned out. I think some people have been doing a little bit too much, but I also think for the professors, is that, we're doing a lot of work on top of what we're already doing on our day-to-day basis. And to commit to this, it takes work. It takes time. It takes preparation. It takes planning. And I just hope that everybody gets to understand that everybody that's doing the teaching on here, especially, those who have been in their fields for a long time, whether they have their doctorates or not, that they are spending time outside of their day-to-day life to teach. And one of the reasons I do this specifically is because education is going to be the thing that we're going to have to stick to as we move forward, especially through the next 4 years. And I have spoken at length about freedom schools and what's going on with our society and everything that we need to do, because if we don't have our education together, we already see what's going on in society within government and how things are being rolled back. You see what's been signed with regards to segregation. You see what's been going on with the rolling back of DEI. And you see how companies and even educational institutions are crumbling up under that. So if we're looking at this stuff now and we are being set back to the 1950s and 60s, and even the president himself has said, the best time for, when America was great was the 1870s to the 1920s, that should tell you something. That should tell you something right there. And we are at this time where the stuff that I'm teaching right now and some of the stuff that other people are teaching, whether we're talking about DEI, whether we're talking about racism, disability, inclusion, accessibility, any of those topics are being snatched out of schools. And then how are people going to learn? They're talking about the whole thing about dismantling the Department of Education and handing stuff over to states' right. But I want you guys to pay attention to what's going on with the states' rights things, because Ruby Bridges, that whole thing would not exist. It would not have happened had it not been a states' rights issue, because states were saying, we don't want black people to have an education, and we don't want black people to to basically be in schools with their white counterparts. So what ends up happening? It's the exact same thing that Trump is trying to reenact now. So the reason why I did this particular topic, roots of racism, bias, prejudice, and systemic oppression, and reason why I started with this is because of what's going on in the government. And so I hope that the people that have been taking this class, can really understand that, and they can really understand that they're going to need the education of what's going on in order to move forward. Because as I've pointed out before, this is not a race thing. It's not necessarily a white versus black thing, but it is a have versus the have-nots when you start talking about who has money and how that upper class, basically rich people, created a racial caste system so that they can control people that's up under them, whether they're white or black or whatever. I'm not going to go off topic too much, but I am going to go ahead start with this lecture because the lecture, like I said, is roughly about 30 minutes or so, and I want to get into it. So for those who will have a chance to pick up on it on YouTube later, they'll be able to watch it on YouTube. And then for those who are here now, if you want to chime into the lecture, you're more than welcome to stay here. This class is offered on Google Classroom. It's been up there for quite some time now, and all the lecture materials are up there. So with that being said, only thing I say is welcome to week 7. We're going into week 8. And up until this point, we've spent the last 6 weeks unpacking the roots of racism, how it's developed, how it operates at the psychological and systemic levels, and how it affects marginalized groups across different dimensions of identity. So this week, we are shifting our focus from diagnosis to solutions. We ask, how do we dismantle racism and bias? And so let's begin with something foundational. Racism isn't just about individual attitudes. This is something that we covered in week 1. It's embedded in politics. Its practices as media, institutions, and in everyday interactions. That means addressing it requires multi-level strategies: personal, interpersonal, organizational, and systemic. So let me begin by saying this. Change doesn't begin in the halls of Congress. As much as we would like to think so, it does not begin in the halls of Congress. It doesn't begin in a courtroom or in a corporate boardroom either. Real, lasting change, transformational change, begins within. It begins with each of us taking a hard, honest look in the mirror and asking, what role do I play in shaping the world around me? Thanks, Chef. And we have to remember now, nobody is born with hate in their heart. This is something that we have to kind of, unlearn, get out of our head. Nobody is born with hate in their heart, but we are born into a world with certain narratives about race, power, and worth, and have been told and retold for generations. So these stories seep into our consciousness, into our institutions, into the way we see another, and whether we recognize it or not, those stories shape our behavior. And that's why education is so vital. I started this whole course stating that we need to educate ourselves and we need to stay educated, because everything that's coming down through the pipelines, it's a lesson in law. It's a lesson in history. But most of all, from my standpoint, as a social psychologist, it's a lesson in psychology. It's a lesson in sociology and everything else. And so, thank you very much. And so, being just as I mentioned, education is vital. And it's not just the kind you get from textbooks or lectures like this one. It's a willingness. It's basically the kind that comes from listening, from unlearning, and from humility. See, being anti-racist isn't a title that you give yourself. A lot of people will sit up here and say, well, I'm anti-racist. You're not really anti-racist till you put in the work. It's a practice. It's a discipline. It's a willingness to sit with your discomfort to ask, why did I make that assumption? Why did I cross the street? Why did I hesitate to speak up? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. And let's be honest, we all carry bias. I carry bias. You carry bias. It doesn't make us bad people. And I was trying to make sure I was getting that across during the course of this class over the last 7 weeks, that just because we have a bias doesn't necessarily make us bad people. It just makes us human. And a lot of people kind of hold on to whatever they have determined for themselves, and they call themselves that. So the goal isn't to be perfect. This whole class wasn't trying to get people to be perfect. It wasn't trying to make one group of people feel bad. That's why I said that everybody was welcome to the course. The goal is to be better. The goal is to be better than what you were yesterday, to grow, to stretch our understanding and expand our empathy. That was the goal. Because when we learn more about one another, when we truly listen, we begin to see not just the differences between us, but the common hopes that bind us. So now I'm not just talking about individual reflection. For instance, I'm talking about action. I'm talking about standing up when it's inconvenient. Speaking out when it's uncomfortable. Challenging the offhand comment, the lazy stereotype, the subtle exclusion, because silence in the face of injustice is a form of consent. You see, we've inherited a world shaped by the choices of those who came before us. But we are not bound by that inheritance. We are the authors of our own future. And each day, with each decision, we write a new chapter. Just like the chapter that we're writing right now in a new book that's going to be going over the next 4 years. So the question is, what kind of story do you want to tell? As we move forward in this new administration, what is the story that you want to tell as an individual, as a person, as a human, as a neighbor, as a family member, as a husband, as a spouse? What is the story that you want to tell? This journey, this work of anti-racism, it's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. It's about living out the values we claim to believe in: dignity, equality, justice. It's about understanding that progress is possible, but only if we're willing to do the work. So don't wait for the world to change. Be the reason it does. The next part I wanted to talk about was allyship. And there was a whole class that I had based off of allyship. And I put the class on hold for right now. And so I took it away off of my links and off of my roster or whatever, because it's something I really need to think about. Because it's a word that we hear a lot these days, but often without the weight that it deserves. And being an ally isn't about hashtags. You know, you get out there and you do a video, you put up a post, and you throw up some hashtags on something. It's not about hashtags. It's not about a quote or putting up a graphic once a year, because you see everybody come out the woodwork around Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. Everybody is throwing up all these quotes when some of these same people, had they existed during that time, would have been condemning him. It's about how you show up when there's no applause. When people get up, whether they have a crowd of one person or whether they have a crowd of 10,000, did they show up, and did they show up consistently? That's what it's about. So allyship means using power, using your power, using whatever power, platform, or privilege that you have, not to speak for others, but to stand with them. It's not about being the savior in someone else's story. Because too many people get out here and they make the story about them and about their own personal thing. It's about recognizing that we're all bound together, that our freedoms, our dignity, our futures are connected. Now, sometimes allyship is loud, and it means speaking up in that meeting when someone gets talked over. I've had plenty of chances like that throughout my career, especially in corporate. It means calling out that joke that wasn't funny, the comment that cut deep, even if it was just a slip. It means challenging those around you, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. But other times, allyship is quiet. It's about listening, learning, reflecting. It's understanding that you don't need to have all the answers before you begin. You just need the courage to show up and the humility to keep going. And let's be honest, there will be mistakes. There will be mistakes. You might say the wrong thing, you might get called in, but that's okay. Because being an ally doesn't mean being perfect, it just means being present. It means showing up anyway and being willing to learn from it. Now, I want to say something, especially to those in the positions of privilege, whether it's racial, economic, gender, or otherwise. Allyship starts by acknowledging the playing field is not level. And a lot of people forget that. That some folks are running with wind at their back and others are running with weights around their ankles. And once you see that, once you really understand that, you've got a responsibility to help shift the balance. And let's not forget that allyship just isn't about individuals either. It happens within communities. White folks holding each other accountable, for instance. Men challenging another to do better. Because I can tell you a number of times where I've been in groups where men are being so misogynistic against women that is sickening. And it's not just limited to one type of race or one type of religion. So, straight allies, for instance, standing up against homophobia. We don't need perfection, we need partnership. We need people willing to roll up their sleeves and to do the work. Not just for a moment, but for the long haul. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about policy. It's about people. It's about the kind of society that we want to build. One where every child, no matter the background, feels seen, feels valued, feels safe. So you don't have to wait for permission. Don't wait for a moment of crisis. Start wherever you are. You speak up, you stand firm, and never underestimate the power of one voice. Never underestimate the power of one voice. Especially joined with many. And that's one of the things that we have to do right now and that we're definitely looking forward right now is that there is so much going on. So much going on, especially at the governmental level. And you see how people are just getting bogged down. They're getting tired. They're getting drained because there's so much stuff that's happening. And then everything that's going on, we don't necessarily know how this is going to affect us in the long run. Because in the long run, what may end up happening is that it may take us another 5 to 10 years to get past all of this. It may take longer. Everything that's been undone so far may take a lot longer in order to fix and to put back. But what is going to be your story and how you move forward? So all of this is basically how change begins. And this is how justice is going to move forward. when we as individuals start taking steps to start speaking up and joining others, joining the many. So let's move on to institutions. And when I'm talking about institutions, schools, businesses, nonprofits, governmental agencies, because if we're serious about dismantling racism, we can't just look inward. Remember, I've mentioned this before. This is not only about yourself as an individual and about prejudice. We have to take a hard look at the structures we operate in. The places where policies are made, where decisions are shaped, where opportunity is either extended or denied. We see it all the time happening right now in this present day. You can look at 50 examples just in the last week alone. It's not enough for organizations to say they value diversity anymore. Why do you think we're boycotting Target at the moment? Why do you think any of these boycotts are going on at the moment? Because organizations at one point in time say, hey, we value diversity at this, and then the same breath, we have a new regime that comes in and say, hey, if you don't take this down, we're going to come after you or whatever. And they were like, you know what? We don't value diversity anymore. We value our bottom dollar. We value the money that we get from your community for saying that we value diversity. These companies don't have to just value diversity. They need to pull a Costco. They need to say, we not only value diversity, but we demonstrate it. And this is kind of where we're coming from now. Is that they have to build the foundation of how they operate. And if they don't operate, then they need to get out. We need to stop supporting people who claim to support us only for us to support them by giving them our money. We have to. Companies have to build it in the way that they operate, whether it's in the way that they hire, the way that who they promote, who they listen to, because representation matters. And if you got everything that's being attacked right now, if you even look at the government and how they were just taking down pictures of every black pilot, every black person that was anywhere near notable out of the Pentagon. And you have the same thing happening in our organizations and stuff as well. You have universities like Columbia bending backwards and say, hey, we're going to administer your history with regards to indigenous history, African history, and so on and so forth. But they didn't say anything about European history. You see how these institutions bend over backwards for fascism. It was all about diversity, equity, inclusion until they were backed in a corner and they said, we're not going to fight this fight. They can go fight their own fight and they can suffer. We need to stop giving them money. We need to back off from them. Because as I said, representation matters. Because representation without voice, without power, without influence, that's just optics. It's just optics. And we saw that's exactly what it was with Target. We've seen it way too many times. Companies releasing statements after a tragedy, pledging solidarity, hosting a workshop or two. But the real question is, what happens when the headlines fade? What kind of culture are you cultivating when nobody's watching? That's where the work begins. Organizational change requires more than just slogans. It requires more than just people putting up commercials with a bunch of black people, much like McDonald's does all the time and has been doing ever since the 80s. It requires systems thinking. It means asking, are our hiring practices fair? How do you know that, as we talked about in our course, that it's not about your job skills. It's pretty much about bias. That Keisha is not going to be hired or get as many callbacks as Emily just because of the name, just because of the bias where a person says, all right, this sounds like a black name and I don't want to deal with black people. What does that tell you? These same companies have to ask themselves, are we making room at the table? All these people just rolling back DEI initiatives? Are they making room at the table for us? Are they making room at the table for Hispanics? Are they making room at the table for the LGBTQIA? Are they making room at the table for everybody else that's out there? Who are they making room at the table for? Who are they valuing at the end of the day? Or are they just asking folks to stand in the back and applaud? See, this work also means resourcing this work. That DEI committee, give them a budget. I just left a company. It's like we at least had a budget for all the stuff that we were doing. That training program, make it a part of your leadership development. Not just a one-off for public relations, because once companies do these things, they go all in. It's like, yeah, we did this and we did that. They make a big noise about it, but once you look internally at the company, they're not doing anything. Those same coworkers are struggling. The disabled coworker that's trying to get a new computer or to get some accessible software, guess what? He's not getting it, or she's not getting it. This is what happens because they will come out and say, hey, we value diversity. We value equity. We value inclusion, but internally they don't do it. So none of this, basically all of this is about serious change. Then the people that's doing the equity work should be at the executive level. It should never become a time that, oh, you know what? We're not going to do DEI anymore because guess what? We never had a person in the C-suite anyway to do this work. It shouldn't be buried in some type of subcommittee without authority. And this is often what, when it happens. And I've worked for Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. And this is what happens. It was never about really committing to DEI. It was about optics. So I'm not trying to shame anyone. This is something that is about aligning your values with your actions. If you say equity matters, then it should show up in your policies, in your data, in your day-to-day decisions, because fairness isn't just a feeling, it's a practice. And finally, when, we've got to recognize that the culture of an organization is shaped by what it tolerates and what it rewards. I can talk to any person who is a minority and ask them if they feel valued at their company. And a majority of them would tell you that they don't. I can ask you at any given point in time if they say, hey, you know what? Do you feel that your voice has weight if you bring up an issue? More than likely they don't. So do people feel safe speaking up? This is something that we call psychological safety. It's not always the case. A lot of people don't speak up because if they do, they feel they'll get fired. Are your concerns taken seriously? Are there consequences when lines are crossed? Or are they swept up under the rug? When accountability is real, when transparency is valued, and when people feel seen and respected, you create a space where everyone can thrive. And that ultimately is what we're fighting for. Not just diversity, not just inclusion, but belonging. A culture where people aren't asked to leave parts of themselves at the door in order to succeed. Because I can tell you right now, you can't always leave your culture at the door. You can't leave your skin color at the door. You can't leave who you are at the door. You can't leave your religion necessarily all the time at the door. That's the kind of leadership that we need. And that's definitely something that we're not going to get in our current administration and our government. And it's something that we definitely can't even look at these companies for. Because these companies, at the end of the day, their responsibility is to their shareholders. So let's bring all of this full circle. And I'm not trying to keep everybody any longer than what I need to, and I know that, with regards to the lecture that's going to be on YouTube as well, people are going to watch it, and I don't want to just bore people to death, but because while individual reflection matters and while cultural change is essential, we also have to reckon with the systems, the policies that shape opportunity, that dictate outcomes and determine whose lives are protected and whose lives are neglected. Real justice, real equity requires more than just changing hearts and minds. It requires changing laws, changing budgets, changing the structures that for too long have left too many people locked out and left behind. We've seen it in policing practices that disproportionately target black and brown communities, in sentencing laws that punish poverty more than crime. I'm not sure if people remember that case where a while ago they call it affluenza, where a rich white kid went and killed four of his friends in a car, and he received a slap on the wrist. And black people were making a statement they could have never, because they didn't have the money. He had the money. He got a slap on the wrist. Or that kid that sexually assaulted young women at a school. He got a slap on the wrist because the judge said he didn't want to ruin this young man's future. But what does that mean for everybody else? So you see it in the voting policies that silence voices instead of lifting them up. I'm sure people have seen more than enough of these town halls that have been going on, and how people are speaking out and the politicians aren't even listening to them. Or in the education systems that fund schools based off of zip codes, not student potential. Because I went to one of those schools. I went to a school in the ghetto, and we didn't have money. So let's be clear that these policies didn't appear by accident. They were made, which means they can be unmade. They can be reformed. They can be rewritten, replaced with something a lot better, something fairer, something rooted in the dignity of every person. But that kind of change doesn't happen by itself. It happens because people demand it. Because organizers knock on doors and young folks take to the street and everyday citizens raise their voices until those in power have no choice but to listen. That's what movements like Black Lives Matter have shown us. That the arc of the moral universe only bends when people put their hands on it. When they push and they pull and they insist that the status quo is not enough. Activism can feel daunting. The problems seem massive. The resistance is real. But history reminds us progress is possible. We've seen it in civil rights legislation, in voting rights protection, in moments where people came together across lines of race, faith, and background to say, we are better than this. So vote. Not just in presidential elections, but in your local school board meetings, your city councils, your local ballot initiatives, because that's where policy lives. That's where it starts. Support community leaders. Join mutual aid networks. Push for reform in your institutions, your neighborhoods, your congregations, because activism doesn't always look like a march. Sometimes it looks like showing up to the PTA meetings. Sometimes it looks like organizing a food drive or mentoring a student. Sometimes it looks like refusing to look away. And remember that change is rarely immediate. It is often slow, sometimes messy, imperfect. But if we're brave enough to keep going, if we link arms and stay in the fight, we can build something better. Not just for ourselves, but for the generations that follow. That's the work. So, oh goodness. Every time I go through my notes for stuff, it's just like there's so much to talk about and just not enough time to actually do it. But I want you guys to remember something. This is a legacy that we have the power to write. We have a chance to change it. And it's not going to happen overnight, and we probably in for the long run. So before I close, I want to speak directly to something that many of you may be feeling, especially those who've been doing this work, not for a semester, but for a lifetime. The truth is, fighting racism, pushing for equity, showing up day after day, it is exhausting. And even while I was doing this class and I'm teaching this class, it has been draining for myself as well. Because some of this stuff is relived trauma. Even as I go back and I'm reading the books and I'm looking at the videos, everything that I have assigned to everybody else in this class, I have to do myself. So when I'm saying, all right, go read Bias by Jennifer Eberhardt, go read Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, go look at these videos by Kimberly Crenshaw and how she is talking about intersectionality and what's going on with Black women or, other minorities. Let's go back and read the new Jim Crow. Every time that we go through this stuff, it is exhausting. And that's especially true if you're part of the communities that's most impacted by injustice. The emotional labor, the constant vigilance, the feeling that no matter how far we go, the goalpost keeps moving. It just continuously moves. And it wears on you. And I want you to hear this clearly. That feeling is real. That fatigue is valid. And you're not alone. But I also want to remind you that every movement for justice has been powered by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It doesn't necessarily start with the person that's already in the Senate or that's in the House or that's the president or that's the professor. Sometimes it starts just with individuals, maybe sitting up here looking at the class, learning something new. Because this whole thing is about education, and sometimes you have to take that education and you start teaching your children, you start teaching your community, you start speaking out. That's what it's about. It's not all at once, but steadily over time. Folks who got tired but didn't give up. Folks who didn't always see the fruit of their labor but planted the seeds anyway. I can't necessarily say that I can see the fruits of teaching a course like this. You get on, you get people to attend, you do your lectures. Sometimes you have 5 people, sometimes you have one person, sometimes you have 100 people. I can't always see the light at the end of the tunnel on where this is going to get me, but I'm hoping that I at least reach one person that can go out and carry on this fight, whether I'm around or not. Because if I did that, that means that they believed, sometimes fiercely, sometimes quietly, that a better world was still possible. So when you're feeling burned out or disheartened, I want you to rest. Hope is that thing inside of us that we have to hang on to. But I also don't want you to retreat. Take a breath, not because the work isn't urgent, but because you are. I've told people when this class started, we were going to tackle a lot of topics and stuff that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. And sometimes the work was going to make people triggered. And if it did, to back off, drop the course if they have to always rejoin later. Because your well-being matters. I didn't say that because I wanted certain groups of people to leave. I said that because I wanted certain people to be okay. Your joy matters. Because if we're going to build a more just world, we need you in it. not just surviving, but thriving. Now, hope, it's not blind optimism. It's not the absence of struggle. Hope is that thing inside of us that insists, despite the setbacks, despite the headlines, despite the history, that something better is still within reach, that change is possible, that people, when given the chance and the truth, can come together and do what's right. And you, each of you, are a part of that legacy. So yes, the road is long. The work is definitely hard, but history has its eyes on us at this very moment. What's going to happen over the next month, the next half a year, the next 4 years, history has its eyes on us. And the future is listening. What we do now, how we show up, how we support each other, how we lead with both courage and compassion, that's what will shape the world our children inherit. So as we close out this week, and as I mentioned, this will be the last lecture for this particular class. There's another class that's coming up, this Movements That Matter, the psychology of resistance, that's going to be coming up in summer. So sometime the class is already open for people to sign up, but sometime around late May, maybe early June is when I'll be doing that class. And I want to leave you with a challenge. So it's your time to take everything that you've learned over the past 8 weeks and put it into action, not just in the discussion forums, not just in theory, but in a way that reflects your voice, your insight, your vision for a more just world. I've mentioned, so one of the assignments that's going up tonight is a capstone. That capstone is, there are 2 ways to approach it. So the first is that you can write a paper, write a short but powerful 1 to 2 page paper, and you choose an issue, a real issue, something rooted in racism, bias, or systemic oppression, and you define it clearly, and you give us context. You show us what history has to say about how we got here. Then you bring in the social psychology, you use the theories, the concepts, the tools that we've been working with, and you ground your analysis in evidence. Or you can just talk about it and just how it makes you feel. But most importantly, the whole thing is to offer solutions. We can't just sit back and study this stuff. We have to be able to put it into practice. And this is how this issue, tell us how this issue can be addressed, whether that's in the classrooms, courtrooms, communities, or even Congress. And then option 2, which I'm really pushing for, is for those who want to speak directly to the world, create a video. Whether you put this video on TikTok or whether you put it on YouTube or Instagram, put up a video 3 to 5 minutes and use your voice, your perspective, your creativity to break down the issue, explain why it matters, and back it up with research and case studies we've explored or whatever. You can just take whatever that we've learned throughout this course and tag me in it. I'm going to put up an initial video possibly tomorrow or maybe even tonight that I want people to stitch to just share what they've learned and how, learning about this topic is going to be able to affect social change. Have a good night, Chef. But this isn't just the final assignment, it's a statement. It's your opportunity to show what you've learned, and not just about the systems we study, but about your power to change them. So dig deep, be bold, and remember, change begins when we decide to act. For you guys that stuck with me, thank you very much. And for those of you who have been in class, I really appreciate it. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to try to figure out what's going on, how I'm going to continue teaching this work, or what changes I need to make, because there are times I have been overwhelmed, but then there are other times that I have to deal with real life as well. So as I kind of move forward and try to get some of the stuff that I need to get together done, work related, education related. There's some stuff that I'm putting together at graduate school at the moment. So it is a lot going on. But otherwise, I plan to stay engaging. I plan on continuing putting up, bits and pieces of knowledge and getting ready for the next course. And hopefully TikTok will still be around after April 5th. We'll see. Otherwise, you guys have a good night. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll see you guys in the future. Take care.